more and more soldiers out of Ukraine are requiring, what was it, such treatments, whether to expedite their healing to get them back to the front, or to, safely, what was it, transition them into retirement and keep them healthy.
So removing a barrier to care of actually having to like go and see a physician if one's available, if you're in a place where you can have one, so that people don't end up in the hospital, that they could be like monitored and their health could be addressed like ongoing.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. And so, for instance, what was it in these clinics? It provides in the Ukraine, we do it in a bit of a pop-up style. Of course, I mean, we kind of have to shift things around depending on what's still standing. Whereas in New York, New Jersey, and Florida, we're able to go to people's homes, offices. We have corporate partnerships with hotels, for instance, where we treat both staff and guests. We have relationships with the unions. We supported the unions during some of their strikes during the pandemic and things like that, making sure everybody had their testing, their vaccinations, are kept, safe and healthy. And so it's breaking down any barrier to access, whether that be physical or monetary, because we are covered by Medicare, Medicaid, all the insurances, things like that.
So my background in my younger days, I was a addiction and mental health therapist in Vancouver, and it was in the like kind of early. I'm dating myself, but it was in like the earlier days of the internet. Like everyone had the internet, but it wasn't what it was now. And one of the big conversations was whether or not online therapy could be useful. Now, of course, at this stage, as we're having this conversation, it's like a totally normal thing, like doing therapy through Zoom or even people getting text messages, all of that. But back then, the idea that you would do something over the phone or through text message, forget about it, but online videoing was like a really hot debate. And one of the things that I think is so miraculous is like how many more people can access therapeutic support now that that barrier of having to go in. Because some of it could simply be I'm busy, or it could be I have difficulties leaving the house that are either physical or mental that have to do with my wellness. It could be I live somewhere remote, so there's not a therapist here. So the idea of like removing barriers to service has always been something that I find like super appealing, and I love how that's um, taken place in regards to like mental health. This is super cool because again, it's that barrier to service of being able to see someone. But where do we need to keep getting better so that people can get service? What other opportunities are there out there?
Well, absolutely. Far more healthcare. In the addiction space, of course, we need far more beds. We need to extend it from 30 days to 90 days covered. There's, I mean, so many pieces there that we need to do far better on. And never mind housing. There's, different countries doing some really innovative things to support the unhoused. What was it? And I mean, tools like ZiphyCare. Like if Canada wasn't so hesitant to explore technologies like the one that we're using in the U.S. I mean, we'd be able to deploy in the downtown east side and things like that, and run primary care pop-ups just like we do in Jersey at the project. Because of course we work with social services and various government agencies like that, and set up in everywhere from community centers to the various projects on different days, and make sure that just everyone, it gets checked out, right? And all they have to do is either, if they don't want to come downstairs, we'll go up to them. Plus
Mhm.
we also offer service in 20 languages.
Mm.
So we are able to offer like cultural support, make people comfortable, who understands where they're coming from, what those cultural barriers or nuances might be to look out for. And, and also when we do go into people's homes, we're also able to do environmental and cognitive assessments,
Mhm.
which creates such a much bigger picture for any kind of diagnostics, right? And then we're able to bring in resource to address that. So it's much more than 15 minutes in your doctor's office or a video call or things like that. It's that continuum of care is essential to keep people healthy at hospitals, giving them a far better quality of life.
To whatever degree you're comfortable speaking to this, where do you think what's the root of that hesitancy to embrace this kind of technology in Canada?
Anti-risk. What was it? Essentially, the Canadian government, unfortunately, is a little bit anti-risk. It's also, I know some people are working toward creating a much more streamlined, kind of onboarding of technologies such as ours, that isn't determined by like who you know, right? Who you're
Mhm,
drinking with, and
mhm,
it's unfortunate. Babylon was such a hype stock, and what was it? It was such a red flag to me when TELUS purchased the rights, so the Canadian rights to Babylon, because of course, I mean, I have so many connections in the UK where it had been, what was it initially used, hearing all these horror stories about, what was it, mistreatment of patient information, how what was it, patient information from one patient was sent to a different patient, and how their diagnostic bots were ineffective and dysfunctional, and so I thought it was a really dangerous thing. And when Babylon crashed and burned and went bankrupt, I wasn't surprised, like at all. I think there's far better technologies out there. I think if our government had actually kind of engaged in some of the forums that I have been able to engage in Boston in particular, there's a lot of health forums, which basically pulls together all the big players with the next gen technology that you can try out. And because it was so interesting to me that Alberta, they were the one province that did an actual kind of diagnostic assessment on the um, on the data protections, data security of Babylon, and refused to implement it until those defects were corrected. And whereas, what was it? Ours has military grade data security, right? And so there's better stuff out there. The government just needs to explore a lot more, um, and just open up the world a little bit more, I think, in order to make better choices before they invest so deeply, so heavily.
yeah, but why the hesitancy? Like, I mean, it's so interesting to see like the rate of adoption in the US for new technology and how things move, especially in the health tech space. Like, why, like, again, to your own level of comfort speaking to this, like, why the hesitancy?
I truly don't know. I think they're always worried about making the wrong choice, because unfortunately they've been burnt a lot
Mhm,
by their choices,
mhm,
and that's unfortunately their own fault. But then it was progress gets inhibited
mhm,
by these situations that they have created for themselves. Um, I mean, I know so many amazing technologies that were born here, right here in Vancouver,
mhm,
that might still operate from Vancouver, but they are being sold in the U.S., Europe, what was it, Middle East, where have you, and but not in Canada.
right.
And I think we should be concerned about that, because like that's a huge brain drain, right?
Yeah,
Never mind an
yeah.
huge economic what was it concern, given all the what was it all the potential, everybody's filing in Delaware, right? So
It's such a Yeah, it's there's a lot that I could say here. I spent a lot of time in like health tech, med tech worlds with different organizations and leaders, and I think the Canadian story around this is fascinating. Like such innovative minds and businesses with low adoption rates by the government. It's an interesting conundrum that I don't think the average Canadian knows about.
well, and another problem as well is that technology that is born outside of Canada cannot receive funding inside of
Mm,
Canada, like not
mm.
through the super clusters or things like that. It has to be born in BC or born in Canada, made in Canada, and so there's some lost opportunities there as well.
Totally, 100%. Um, what can you share with us again, to whatever level you're comfortable with, about the work that you're doing in Gaza with this technology?
It's the same as Ukraine.
Mhm,
So basically, so our CEO is Ukrainian.
mhm,
It was it, and then so when that kicked off, we, jumped through the regulatory hurdles. We made sure that we were European compliant, and so on and so forth, just like we have to be with HIPAA in the US and so on and so forth. Got all the legal hurdles, created relationships with the Ministry of Health in Ukraine. What was it? Formed about a dozen partnerships with different NGOs, with boots on the ground there. And so that was going well when Gaza kicked off. But we sent 5 more kits there. We were already working with physicians from Israel, so they were already familiar and they requested it. And it's interesting because, of course, the tensions, what was it, between Israel and Palestine is a really complex. I doubt will rationally resolve itself anytime soon. It might temper, but I don't think it'll ever truly be, fixed.
mhm,
But physicians, however, look at healthcare a lot different from, civilians or politicians. Physicians treat whoever's on their table at that time. We don't check the cards to see, what's your name, where do you come from,
mhm,
who do you identify with. Oh, is it you're a human being, and it's literally in the HIPAA oath that you
mhm.
have this responsibility as a person, what was it, to treat everybody equitably. And so it was great that, you know, politics didn't have an impact on what we wanted to do. And we were able to deploy, and that was at invitation of some Israeli physicians who were already working in that space. So
Is there anything else that you want to say around the organization, the work that you do, or are you comfortable pivoting over to your work at SFU?
sure, let's pivot.
All right. So, how did that all start up?
Well, it was interesting because, of course, I had been running this clean tech engineering consulting firm for many years, and we were in such cool spaces. While like we were newcomers, right? I remember being a member of BCTIA when it was still called that, now BC Tech, and I was like the only woman in that
Mhm,
space, right? And it was cool to see so much going on, and like LEDs were coming on the market, and but there's some issues about that. We were able to dive in and address the so some of them used to explode.
mhm,
They had that issues with moisture getting in, and boom. And so we were able to work with various universities to
mhm,
correct that problem. That became open source technology, and just, moving around in that space from there. Being able to really dig into what new opportunities were out there, like hydrogen fueled airplanes, and so on and so forth. And what was it? And what automatic gas shut-off systems, and what was it, boiler controls, and that was, it is such old technology now, right? Because coding and things like that are, evolved ever since. So anything that we had created back then is now completely antiquated. But it was such an amazing time to be on those front lines. And there was something called Alliance 2030. When Canada first signed on to the UN, when Trudeau first got elected, all these organizations, because basically signing on to the SDGs meant that everybody kind of had to see where do they fit into this picture, and what are the SDGs,
mhm,
and so on and so forth. So there was this huge meeting brought together of what was it, the leaders of various NGOs, funding leaders, university directors, like you name it. Just basically all the power in the world, including government leadership, was in the room, and to have a discussion about what next.
mhm.
And I was fortunate to be part of that discussion. And it was interesting because we were able to kind of voice our thoughts. Like, okay, everybody's here. Now what? And I'm like, okay, we are here all together. Basically, all the decision makers are in this room right now. Why can't we actually develop something? What was it? Start closing some of these gaps, and in meeting spaces like this and engagements like this, who can do what with what, and then we can start addressing these SDGs immediately, right?
Mhm.
Why do we have to mull things over so long, right? And so it was interesting. So SFU actually responded almost immediately and set up DevLab. And, some private funders put forth some seed money. And there was a bit of a competition that I was called in to participate in. And we were basically able to bring our thoughts together, and pitch them within in one afternoon. And what would we do if we had this seed money, right? What
Yeah.
systemic change would we create? And so that's when I proposed what we call the NEAT project, Nutrition Through Engagement in Agricultural Technologies. And we received the seed funding, and the funders, they already had a community in mind that they had a personal relationship with, and introduced us to the Kitasoo Hehe Nation. It's about halfway up the BC coastline, beautiful, home of the spirit bear.
Mm.
And we started there. That was our pilot community. And what was it? Building community greenhouses, community gardens, develop curriculum within the school, like the First Nation school there. It was a huge partner, still is a huge partner of ours. It was set up workshops on like food preservation and nutrition and just the gamut of things. And it also played a part in assisting the community secure $4 million to expand their small hydro system, so they stopped getting the brownouts, so they had more clean energy in the community. So as well as offer some different opportunities to individuals who brought forth their personal ambitions and interests. So we were able to connect some different people, make some introductions, bring them to some cool things, and it went from there. And then other communities heard about the work that we were doing, and now we're working in 6 different nations. And it's I hope that we can grow this right across Canada and just
Mhm.
continually growing our team.
Heck yeah, that's amazing. And how long has that been going on?
Since 2018.
Wow, good for you. That's amazing. Um, let's touch on your work with boards. So, for people who are unfamiliar with it, how would you describe like board work, like the purpose of it, like what a board member would do, anything like that?
Well, it's interesting because some of the councils and committees I sit on, they operate in different ways. If you're working strictly kind of as a board, board of directors and whatnot, it's very financially, and logistically oriented, right?
Mhm.
Whereas my work as an honorary governor with the other honorary governors at the Vancouver Foundation, we worked more around the mission, vision, and values of the organization than the nuts and bolts.
Mhm.
We leave that to the board. And then of course the Advisory Council on Diversity with the Joint Task Force of the Canadian Armed Forces is much more about cultural change. What is it? Advising on policy development, implementation, things like that. Just any kind of anything that we can bring in from our outside engagement, knowledge, experience, so on and so forth, to assist the military in developing inclusion and equity and diversity within the organization. Is that's that direction. But
Yeah.
yeah, boards is more about like the nuts and bolts of things, as well as who you can bring in as new funders and things like that, making those strategic connections.
When did you start getting involved in this level of work and why?
Oh goodness, I'm not sure. I feel like I've been doing it always.
Mhm.
I've always had volunteer work, or
Mhm.
been doing volunteer work in one capacity or another. Even ironically, during university, I used to teach disabled children how to ride horses
Mhm.
before I became disabled.
Uh,
And so I was always involved in one thing or another, but and I actually can't remember which was the first board I sat on. I was always interested in that level of engagement, because I was able to assist kind of steering the ship, if you will. Because quite often I saw these really like well-meaning NGOs kind of like steering off course, and I always have this analogy. I bring it back to like when you're watching Jeopardy on the television, right? And you're yelling at the screen, right? What the answers are. Of course, the guy on the other side isn't going to hear you, right? And you're
mhm,
just like trying to will him to answer it correctly. And I didn't want to be that in these various causes, right? I didn't
mhm,
want to be the person kind of yelling into the void. I wanted to be able to help steer that ship, right? Be
mhm.
the whisper in their ear. So that's kind of why I got involved. I enjoy it so much, and to see what these incredible organizations are working toward and what they accomplish, every day. It's, like for instance, Salal was said just finished building the very first brick and mortar facility in Vancouver to
Mhm,
assist victims of sexualized violence,
mhm,
completely, inclusive of all women, including transgender women, and with Indigenous healing spaces, reporting spaces with advocates, medical clinical space for rape kits, and so on and so forth. So rape victims are no longer having to be dragged around from, police station to 9 hours in the emergency room to, this or that. It's the first space of its kind, right? And to be able to see that being created is so rewarding. That this is happening in our community and it can be done, right?
yeah. Um, I have like a few just like pragmatic questions for you. So you're involved in a lot, and like on like a local level and like a countrywide, like a national level, but also on a global level. So here's the first pragmatic question: how do you do it from just like finding time in the day to not just be involved, but be involved in the to the depth that you need to be involved to make meaningful change? Like, how do you have the discipline of time to make this happen?
Google Calendar. I have everything mapped off, including, the essentials, like when to do laundry, when to run to
Mhm.
the pharmacy, things like
Mm,
that. So, yes, no, and I am extremely structured in that way. I usually work up to 20 hours a day, and having cell phones handy that can do absolutely everything these days is it makes things so much more versatile. I was still able to address work when I was in New York, or I'll be in Iceland next month, and I won't be dropping the ball on anything. It just there's so many ways to keep connected other than being in an office that I really hope that employers reconsider this mandatory in office push that's been happening, because I know a lot of people have been able to balance their work, in a lot more of a healthy way. Being able to, throw in a load of laundry while, what was it in between meetings or things like that. And then they get to spend more time with their families and whatnot.
yeah. I'll go in on that one. So like my the company that I run is like executive coaching training company. We do like leadership development, coaching, all of that, and then all our courses are based on like workplace mental health, company culture, but also like how to write a good email, how to give a good presentation, all of those kinds of things. I get asked a lot about this one, and I'm like, oh my gosh, like you should 100% let people do distance work all over the place. And there's all the different models, and different models are going to work for different companies. My company is 100% remote, and I've never had an issue. Um, but I'd say there's a couple things here. It's like making sure that you hire people who are like 100% self starters and they know how to do that. And for the people who aren't that are already within your organization, giving them the training and support to help them with that. So it's not like you're not just hiring one kind of person. You're accommodating, but you put those things in there, and then just know how to like fail quick with people. So if someone's not doing it, like not able to do it, that's okay. But that's what our business is. It's totally fine. I think companies should go all in on this. What the thing that I understand is like when people are like, "Oh, well, if you're not in office, then you don't have that organic connection point." By nature, things like this, like video, is transactional, like by nature, because very few people are on video more than 5 seconds longer than they need to be. Because it's like, like on video, it's like kind of weird. But if you make it the norm, the same way that email became the norm, the same way cell phones became the norm. So there's like, you just, instead of calling someone, you just video call them. And there's the whole psychology of norming to it where it becomes no longer transactional, but relational. This is just the frontier. This is the new frontier. And companies that are trying to force people back to work, I think, are going to damage their culture. They're going to have retention issues. They're going to have a hard time like recruiting the best people. And it's a waste of effort because it's going this way anyways. So like, why fight the future? Just get really good at it right now. That's my take on it.
Well, and they're going to push, a lot of women back out of the workforce again, you
Totally.
know?
It just seems like such a, why are you doing this? Just roll with it. Don't fight the future. It's here. Let's get really good at it right now.
Absolutely. I mean, because the nature of my work is inherently remote, it's not
Hmm.
like I'm driving up north every day. It's like by necessity. And what was it? I have to be remote. I mean, I could be in one of three offices I have, but what was it? What was it most of the time? I prefer to be here, or I have client meetings. I take them up at Highcroft. My what was it? The people I work with love that. A little bit of schmoozing in a beautiful location, something that gets them out of the office. And it's changing things up, so you can still have those personal communications, develop personal relationships. I mean, when I first started working with the team in New York, I mean, I didn't meet my CEO for like 2 years, I think, after I was hired.
Like there's people that work on our team now that I have maybe been in a room with them 2 times ever that have worked for the company for a long time. It is totally fine. I coach people literally on a global level. Like I deal with people all over the place who I will never ever in my entire life see face to face unless we just happen to run into each other at an airport. It is a, I understand why people are, why businesses kind of fixate on this, and especially also I think part of it is like they've committed to long-term leases or own buildings, and they're like, we want people in these things. I get it, but it limits your talent pool. It's going to hurt the culture. It's going to be a bunch of wasted energy with a lot of bad feelings. Don't bother. Just do it. Get on it really well. Okay, let me ask you my second pragmatic question. You are clearly a very, very involved person. You got a lot of stuff that you're doing. You said you work up to 20 hours a day sometimes. Where where's the self-care? How do you manage taking care of yourself, especially when you're dealing with things that have some very, very like heavy emotional sides to it?
That's interesting. Because the people I work with know that I give it my all, that when I do have to take some me time, like I after coming back from New York, I got some bug that like knocked me out, and my team, just kind of rose to the challenge and took over. And so there's that understanding that I've been pulling my weight, that they're going to take up some of the slack for me when I'm down. And and if I have to disappear for a few days, there's no problem with that. But also at the same time, like I love my work. I love the stuff that I do. I love the people I work with, right? Both on my teams as well as, what was it? So the people we collaborate with and partner with and so on and so forth, like all over the world. Like they're great people, and so I love being able to kind of merge that, that kind of that work life. Sometimes, some of my social events are actual like, kind of business oriented ish. When you're going to these so-called like business events and receptions and things like that, and you're hugging like 30 people, and it's kind of like they become a lot of your social circle and your supports as well, both professionally and
Yeah. All right, so we're about to get into moving towards the end of the interview, and we're going to go into what we call the crucial three, which is three questions that are going to scale in difficulty as we go through them. But before we get to that, is there anything that you want to mention, anything you want to call out, any questions you want to ask me, or anything you just want to put in the conversation in general?
Uh, no, no, not really.
Okay. All right, you ready to go?
Sure.
Okay, so question number one. A lot of people can want to help. And a lot of people could see a problem and say, geez, that should be different. So a lot of people could critique it and point, it should be this or that. I loved earlier your Jeopardy analogy. It's like, oh, like just say this thing. There's a big there's a big difference between seeing a problem, critiquing it, and saying this should be the solution versus taking on the responsibility of making something happen. So why you? Why did you step into that breach and then continue to step into that breach?
If not me, then who? In these situations, and I believe in leading by example. So a lot of people come on board because they see how passionate I am about the work that needs to be done. They become passionate, and and also, I mean, like, I also believe in mentorship, right? So being able to assist younger generations in doing this work, showing them how like inspiring it is to be involved on this level, um both locally and globally, and what potential is out there for a career that's not just some 9 to 5 that's going to pay your bills, right?
Mm.
Um but but I think that what was it, like, doing this work is just something that um we can all do a little bit of. And I think, you know back in the day, it was that there were more social service organizations. It was that there was like the women, what was it, at home, during the war, making soup for the homeless and knitting socks for the war effort and things like that. And they were kind of filling these government gaps. And then kind of governments, started taking over and trying to fill in a little bit more, but then they still left these enormous gaps. And was it, so we need people who are interested in filling those spaces, because we're looking at things like volunteerism, for instance, is becoming less and less. So we need to just basically inspire our communities around us to be able to step in. But the thing is, it's also about assessing what you're good at, right? You can't just go in and say this is going to fix everything, right?
Yeah,
If
yeah.
you don't know what you're talking about. It's like, think about your own skills, your own strengths, your own connections and networks, and what you can give, and then start thinking about where's the best place for them, right? Like, a lot of people want to start up their own NGOs, but there's so many NGOs out there that would benefit from someone's collaboration instead of building an entire new system that would be competing entity. So there's just ways to kind of do this, and but I do hope that more people get involved in their communities, because there's some really neat work being done.
Um, we touched on this to some kind of more moderate levels, and then it kind of like danced around it a bit. Again, to your own level of comfort, it feels like to me that we are in this increasingly polarized time, and that it's just like COVID accelerated that like a thousandfold. So I would agree with how you captured it. I talk a lot about this on the program. You know, the world's got a lot of real problems, right? Like serious, serious problems. And how do we create a shift that we can bring people together again to work on problems? And I know it's a huge, huge question, but whatever perspective you got on that, because you seem to be someone who does that every day.
um Well, it's interesting because there's no like one answer to that. It's like a multitude of things that need to pull together. I mean, it's both a top down and bottom up effort that needs to happen. Happens on the community level, needs to happen on the legislative level. Like, for instance, like, our governments are being threatened right now, and the overarching umbrellas like the United Nations, for instance, are which kind of enables our human rights, at least like the base points of human rights, through the various conventions. That's being threatened. Like, for instance, if Poilievre gets his way, he's going to remove us as a member state from the United Nations, which would basically, what was it, not give us those overarching protections. So, the UN Convention for Women, what was it, people with disabilities, what was it, UNDRIP, like all of these poof, gone, right? And then we would be reliant on federal and provincial governments to ensure the protection of our human rights. And with Rustad spouting off about removing all these the indigenous rights, that was it's denying climate change, all of those things, then that's of course going to be problematic for the next 4 years, at least for our province. And anyway, so it's a bit of a mess. So it's, for one, we need to find better ways of disseminating truthful information, scientific data that people can understand and believe, and who is to deliver that, right? Um, Nobody's trusting Trudeau at the moment, so he's not the one. What was that? But who would be? Identifying those people that people can implicitly trust, right? Can we get like Jane Goodall in here and people like that too? People who have had respect for many years, from what was it, across all demographics, people in here to start addressing truth to people too. And then of course there's the whole process of change management. I mean, when COVID came into play, there were too many scare tactics out there. What was it, that I don't think that the provincial government or the federal government had enough of an emergency plan, emergency preparedness plan in place. Um, they had forecasted something like this happening many, many years ago. There's been a lot of talk about what to do, but no actual like rollouts. And trying to convince a lot of people who are really scared, like terrified, that they're gonna die. I mean, what was it? So, and they don't know what to understand and what to hear, especially if perhaps they don't have a scientific background or don't trust doctors or authority figures or things like that. Um, then what, right? And so then we get, anti-vaxxers and flat earthers and things like that. We need to be able to, it's funny because we're talking about controlling speech, essentially. And freedom of speech, of course, is an inherent right. But should there be some kind of censorship so that it is freedom of true speech, of freedom of truth, right? Um, and so that is a huge conversation I think we have to have. What was it, in order to assist everybody coming to some kind of discussion and understanding with more accurate facts that are closer to what is, rather than these wild ideas all over the place that are continuing to scare the bejesus out of people, and will never get any kind of consensus or understanding or reason. And there's so many things that we have to look at, unfortunately, and a lot of really difficult conversations to have about how much is too much.
Yeah. Who does the talking? Who has the conversation? It's like it's so wild because I just feel like, and I'm not gonna say everyone, but there seems to be like the cynicism of like we don't trust politicians, which of course is kind of traditional thing. We don't trust politicians, but we don't trust the media. We don't trust like local government. We don't trust doctors. We don't trust scientists. Like, well, who do we trust at this point, right? And it's so concerning because there are like real things going on, like real serious things that in the future, but also right now that we need all the minds on, not just a couple of the minds, and most certainly not like absentee debates about what's going on, like people really getting involved. That was such a really thoughtful answer. Thank you. Okay, last one. Everybody goes through stuff. Everybody. And some people experience like high levels of crazy stuff throughout their life. Some people medium, some people a little with like a couple big things. But the one thing is that everybody goes through it on some level, no matter what, no matter where they are in the world. Um, you have had a really epic impact on the world. You've done a lot of stuff and continue to do a lot of stuff. What was the psychology of how, for you, of how you recovered from your accident to stepping back into your power and like engaging with the world, putting both hands on the steering wheel and going? Was that something that was natural to you, or was that something you had to scale up and really like reflect on to do?
That's interesting. So when it happened, the year it happened, 97, a lot of my friends died that year, childhood friends that I had grown up with, that I was incredibly close to. I was one of the only childhood friends from that group left. And that was one of the major kickers, was that they lost their lives to all sorts of different horrible situations. So, but I haven't lost mine. Like I'm still here, right? I mean, it might be running things on my arse, but I'm still here, right? And and that was a major thing. And another thing too, Rick Hansen used to grow up. He grew up down the road from me, up north, and a mutual friend of ours, who was his high school principal, who was like an uncle to me, told Rick that, what was it, that this had happened to me and whatnot. And so Rick showed up in the hospital, and that was a bit of a kick in the pants too, because it's like, oh, this dude can do that. I better do something. I better do something with my life. But I was given a second chance, and so I might as well, bloody well use it.
Heck yeah, amazing. All right, listen, we're coming to the end. Anything that you want to mention? Of course, we'll put all the links to your company and all of that in the show bio. But is there anything that you want to shout out that you want people to check out before we wrap up?
For sure, for sure. If for anyone who hasn't heard of the Prosperity Project, you might have seen some of the articles about the organization in the Globe and Mail. If you are interested in becoming a mentor or being a mentee through its Rosie initiative, please check out the website. I think it's the CanadianProsperityProject.com, if I remember correctly. So that's something that I'd love. We're always looking for new mentors, both male and female. And there's some great research publications that we put out there. Some national research that we've done on leadership, diversity, the economic well-being of women, post pandemic, and things like that. So there might be some interesting things for you to read.
Heck yeah, and we'll put links to everything in the show bio. Listen, Kerry, thank you so much for your time. I had an awesome time talking with you today.
Yeah, you too. And thank you so much for giving me the opportunity.
All right, everyone. I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. It's always fun talking to someone who just is just out there doing it, and I feel like totally energized. So thank you so much, everyone. We'll see you next time on One Step Beyond.
One step